Hello, everybody. I am the Director of Landscape Architecture at the BAC, and I am pleased today to introduce my faculty colleagues as they present Change, Hic and Nunc, intersection of three landscape architecture perspectives. And with this presentation, my colleagues aim at addressing the question of how can the profession find its way and reach its full potential to initiate change. And with this, please join me in welcoming Adam Molinski, Yufan Gao, and Alexandre Champagne to the podium.
Does that seem like it's working? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Happy to be here. I will share my perspective, one of three, on change here and now, which is what Hic et Nunc means. So I think it's obvious from today's presentations, and also if you've read any newspaper in the last, I'd say, 5 years, that changes all around us. Seems like it's at a ever-increasing scale and at an ever-increasing pace and intensity. So it's something we're going to be dealing with, whether we like it or not, and it's going to massively impact the built environment. There's no question about that. How much we do preemptively and how much we're reacting to change that comes towards us is yet to be determined, and I'm sure will vary greatly for different cultures, different societies, depending on resources, etc. And then, it's moving. Got life of its own. So we know landscape architecture and urban design. I mean, it's not going to solve systemically all these big issues and changes we're seeing, but it can, in a real way, deal with all sorts of things, whether it's carbon sequestration, improving water quality, enhancing biodiversity, improving air quality, dealing with sea level rise, allowing for flood mitigation, etc. We're also seeing, along with all these kind of physical changes to our environment, a lot of, there's three sides for every one tab. We're seeing this kind of mental health crisis, especially among younger people. We see this kind of in the news all the time. Try to do just one slide. There we go. And landscape architecture and urban design. Is it better for you to control it? Yes, okay. I guess we'll, so next. So landscape architecture and urban design, again, is not going to systemically change a health crisis. Back to where we were. No. Oh boy. Should I like turn this off? I do not know what that is. Landscape architecture and urban design is not going to change this systemically, but it is something that can improve our quality of life. It can change the way we live, and I think have an outsized impact on our mental and physical health. So next, please. And so what's always been interesting to me is how the design of public space, I'll just stop trying, how it can solve for these sort of practical issues whether it's, sea level rise or creating shared streets, et cetera, and also really change our daily lives. And so for me, the question as a designer really has become, how can we deal with these large scale environmental issues and at the same time rethink what our daily lives look and feel like? How can we design at the scale of infrastructure and at the intimate scale of the human body at the same time? So we're way ahead now. Can we go? Yeah. Is it like on the automated timer thing? Were we good? No. And so I think as landscape architects, we have quite a bit of practice, and I think it's quite established in academia and the profession how to design for environmental issues. There's lots we have to learn and a lot to evolve there. We certainly have to figure it all out, but I think that portion of urban design and landscape architecture, we have a pretty good grasp on. Whereas I think the sensory design point of view, I felt at least when I was going through school and in my own practice afterwards, that we were a little bit limited in the tools we had. And this is a diagram drawing from the book Sensory Design, which was featured in an exhibition at the Cooper Hewitt called Senses, Design Beyond Vision. And this was one of many books and exhibitions that have been happening lately on this topic because it's become more and more of public interest. And as you can see, I think this is a great drawing because it really points out just how complex and how intertwined our kind of sensory environment is. Next, let me just go to the next one. So when I hit this kind of limit in school, I wanted to explore it more. So I began studying and researching sound in public space, not because I'm just interested in just sound, but because in order to look at sound, you have to kind of close your eyes. And once you do that, everything you've ever thought about design kind of goes out the window. Everything's completely reframed. And it's really a whole reset of how I think you perceive design in space. And so after I graduated from UC Berkeley's MLA program, I got a grant to study sound in river delta cities. So the Mississippi Delta in the United States, the Rhine-Meuse Delta in the Netherlands, the Nile River Delta in Egypt, the Ganges Delta in India, the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, and the Pearl River Delta in China. And I chose river deltas because they kind of allowed for a common variable across a huge cross-section of cultures, and because river deltas are inherently at a confluence ecologically, geomorphologically, and culturally, kind of at the intersection of the sea and river. And so we go back. Okay. There's something playing? Not yet. Shouldn't be. I don't know if this blank. Oh, it might have gone all, okay, can stay here. So as part of this research, I collected 387 sound recordings using binaural microphones. Binaural microphones are basically, they look like earbud headphones. They just go in your ear and they use your head as the rest of the microphone to create three-dimensional sound, because there's one in each ear. And I geotagged them all, and right now they live on this SoundCloud page called Landscape Soundings. And so I think next, stay on this one if we can. As I began this research and started collecting recordings, I kind of immediately started to wrestle with, like, all right, maybe good's not the right word, but how do I qualify what is desirable, or like, what am I looking for here? And so as a kind of initial set of parameters to, start to sort these sounds in some way, I started looking at kind of richness, diversity, and sense of place. And what I mean by that is, if I close my eyes and I'm listening to this soundscape, how rich, layered, and varied is it? Meaning how many different sets of sounds can I perceive? Is there a sense of place? Meaning, can I hear where I am? Can I have a sense of where I am in the world? And so now I'm going to play some of these sonic environments that I think meet these parameters in different ways. And so first we'll hopefully, if this works, we'll listen to them first without seeing the image of the place, just blank, and then we'll look at the visual context. So feel free to close your eyes if you're in the room. And if you're on Zoom, I highly recommend wearing headphones. That'll give you the three-dimensional effect. So let's give this a whirl. Should be pretty loud, so. Nope. All right. Back one. Yeah, usually if you hit the slide just once, it should play. Work before. Nope. All right. Maybe let's try the next. Not working. All right. Well, you'll all have to go to my SoundCloud page later. I'll tell you what you would have learned. I'll maybe send out a link afterwards. This is in Alexandria, Egypt, in the Nile River Delta. The next one was in Utrecht. Let me move to the image. There's Utrecht, right, New Delta. We can keep going. I think visually you'll see some common kind of theme, hopefully. That might hint at what you might be hearing. So this is the Sundarbans in India, in the Ganges Delta. Just keep going. Yep, keep going. And this is in Guangzhou in China, in the Pearl River Delta. And then there was others that I felt like didn't meet these parameters, which so all of those were very rich and diverse and very interesting soundscapes. I would have loved for everyone to be able to hear them. Maybe later you can go listen to them online. And then there were others that were harder to decipher where you were, less diverse in terms of the soundscape. And if we go to the next image, which will require two more. We're like this, and if you had heard this, you would have not known really where it was. Its sound could be really anywhere in the world. All the ones previous to this, you have some sense. You might, maybe if you don't know the language, you won't know the exact country, but you have a sense of place. And continue to the next. And so what I started to realize very, very quickly was that urban scale and how we move through the city and the things we use to move, the way we move, has the biggest impact. So here, this is a sonic transect is what I was calling these. Where I moved, this is in Ho Chi Minh City, moving from a big wide street full of motorized vehicles into this little alley and walking back, and the way the sound dissipates and then turns into this really rich, varied, interesting soundscape as you moved from the kind of almost freeway-like atmosphere to the alley. It's unbelievable. It's a huge, huge difference, and more so than many other kind of impacts. This change in urban scale and the change in how we move through it massively, more than anything, impacts your sense of the sonic environment. Next. Yep. Oh, okay. Couple back. Back. Other way. One more than that, yeah. So, you know, what this really, it reinforced everything I had learned in urban design. It's like fundamental urban design for the human scale, both in streets and building size, you know, have activity at the ground floor with commerce and food and life. And you know, where these places were human scale, they were very rich sonically, where they were scaled at the scale of the machine, the car, the motorcycle, etc. They were kind of sonically devoid of any sort of human sense and diversity. And it just so kind of happens that also this really rich sonic landscapes are also a much more sustainable way to live in a city. They're, you know, people walking, people biking, using in the Mekong Delta, like human powered boats, that sort of thing. And so that kind of sustainability and richness of the sonic environment kind of mesh together. So at this point with my research, and next slide, please. It became less about how do we use sound in the design process in a kind of like generative projective way, although I'm still trying to figure that one out. The first thing that seemed most obvious was how, because it is a bit easier, how can we use these type of recordings to make it clear to the public and with in our engagement with the public, the kind of repercussions in a very palpable way of large scale urban design decisions, like how wide our streets are, how we move through the city, those kind of big planning type decisions, which are heavily influenced by all sorts of people, right? And so before this one was a conference I did in Australia, in Brisbane, called the Sonic Environments Conference, where I had people, I set up a listening room, and people simply listened to these recordings on all these different river deltas and just wrote down kind of notes on what they felt they heard. And then last year, this is a photo from a installation I was lucky enough to do at Matadero, Madrid, which, if you haven't been, is a gorgeous museum in Madrid that's converted from slaughterhouse. I was actually surprised. I was like, oh, this is like a real museum. I'm doing an installation and cool. And it's really great. And a ton of people in Madrid go there. It's just kind of like free and open to the public. So it gets great attention. And I was really lucky enough to get to do one of these installations there for about four days. And the prompt was, again, it was based on these recordings I had made. Each river delta had a different pen color that was attached to the set of headphones. And I simply just wrote on a big piece of paper, draw what you hear. And it was about 100-meter long piece of paper. And then for 4 days, just kind of invited people to engage with it however they wanted to. Next slide, please. And so what resulted from all these like hundreds of people coming in, and I will say is maybe just culturally, or maybe it's just the museum setting, people were like surprisingly open and experimental when they were engaging with this, which was really fun. And in the end, we ended up with this kind of like 100-meter long drawing that slowly wrapped and unfurled across the floor. And it became this kind of communal drawing of how people interpreted these soundscapes. Next, please. And here you can see it scanned and flattened. And next. And so people, you can see, kind of interpreted the soundscapes in many different ways. So, you know, I'd say one typology would be people interpreting it as if like thinking about sound waves and like patterning and shape and relating it in a kind of abstract way, which was really fun to see. And then next. And then people also, I think, you know, especially younger participants would deal with it much more in a symbolic way, like drawing dogs and cars and suns and stuff like that. And that was also very interesting. And is there another one? No. Yeah, one should be one more. Yeah. And so I think for me, the really interesting thing is to start with this kind of public engagement. How do we move it into a not just like a sonic exploration, but a whole multi-sensory bodily experience kind of exploration. And I'm excited to announce the official one from Mount Auburn, still coming this week, but my colleague Yufan and I, who's presenting next, are both going to be artists in residence at Mount Auburn Cemetery for the next year, where we're going to be doing a series of public sensory walks over the course of the next year, and asking people to engage in some way through multiple senses and document that. And then we're going to take all that data at the end of this year and then turn it into some sort of multi-sensory public created map of Mount Auburn Cemetery, which for landscape architects is like, it's very important. It's the kind of one of the first publicly designed landscapes in the United States. So it's a huge deal. Precedes Central Park and many other important landscapes. So with that, I will invite Yufan Gao. I hopefully, since I didn't get to do my credits, I'm under time, and you guys will have plenty of time.
So is it better if I stay away from the clicker? Just let you guys control. Okay. So in today's conversation, I want to use 3 metaphors to illustrate how I perceive change in landscape architecture and how it continued to inspire my independent practice studio Galbian that I co-founded with my partner. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first metaphor is change in landscape architecture as throwing 3 balls in the air to get a straight line. Next page, please. In John Montessori's 1973 series, throwing 3 balls in the air to get a straight line, best of 36 attempts, artists threw 3 balls in the air, hoping that a snapshot could catch them aloft and align. Here, the artist's endeavor has changed from making formal inventions, directly arranging the visual components and the compositional forms, to setting up the predetermined conditions for those inventions to happen, assuming as a role as a strategist. This shift finds a perfect counterpart in landscape architecture, as what we're dealing with is oftentimes indeterminacy and a change, which are both at the core of our profession. Next, please. While throwing 3 balls in the air to get a straight line, camera frame actualizes the shapes from those real world phenomenon and situation. In landscape architecture is a function of time and the intertwined interaction between human and nature. So during the BAC lecture on Wednesday, I shared my documentation of setting up event hands for the head of trials to reflect on my affinity for the process rather than a fixed end product. So the question is, how could this idea being expressed in a design project, and how can we as landscape architect act at the role of a strategist? So here I would like to show 2 proposals from our studio. The first is the title of the proposal is Shifting Landscape, Drifting Dream Dune. So this is a proposal for our entrance landscape at Design Miami. The proposal here envisions continuously changing landscape that portray Design Miami as both a temporal event and a lasting institution. Next, please. Tubes of various, thank you. Tubes of various dimensions coupled with the timekeeping device of over 2,000 years, the hourglass, create a generative landscape that evolves throughout the day and the event, altering in both size and color. Next slide, please. The design's appearance constantly changes. negotiating between its initial state of uniformity, the patterns that we designed, and the people's engagement with the landscape as they mixed and removed the sand from its original form. Next, please. The next example is public assembly at Night Rise, which is a nighttime landscape proposal at Burnham Arboretum and Research Forest. The proposal here envisions a participatory landscape illuminated by an ever-evolving constellation of solar lanterns. These lanterns, next page, please. So this is an aerial view of the proposal. These lanterns marks an individual's existence in the landscape while also fostering a dialogue of collective experience. Visitors will place their lanterns at locations resonate with their personal significance, or navigating views those set by previous visitors, or perhaps explore less traveled pathways. The landscape here is always evolving. As lanterns accumulate over time, expressions emerge, and organic public space naturally takes shape. In landscape architecture practice, we have perfected our skill to align 3 balls perfectly. However, here I want to ask, can we also remind ourselves to limit our focus to initiating 3 red balls? Can we be comfortable with designing and only designing the initial state and the predetermined conditions and allowing for all the possibilities and all the outcomes, or we can call it the predictable and predictability. So the second method for change in landscape architecture is as fun ink painting. So during the Renaissance, many artists used a grid to achieve realism in drawing. For example, in this drawing machine, the grid assists the artist in drawing what he saw by sectioning the objects into smaller units, corresponding to smaller units on the paper on their artwork. There was nothing but a grid on the paper to begin with, and every action from there on was systematically prescribed and planned, and so the outcome was already prescribed and planned to achieve the outcome. Next page. Contrastingly, during the same period of time in China and Japan, artists were creating fun ink paintings or hatsubuku, an abstract simplification of forms and freedoms of brushwork, emphasizing spontaneity, fluidity, and capturing the sense rather than the precise representation. It also, in those paintings, valued an active space and suggested rather than fully defined forms. So in those kind of drawings, artists first splashed the ink onto the painting surface, sometimes smearing and sweeping with brushes, resulting in various size, shapes, and richness of inks at different places. And they would then follow the instinct, transforming them into mountains, rocks, clouds, and mist, imbuing with the suddenness of creation. Denmark painters regarded fun ink painting as an exercise in seeing meaningful values slowly emerge from what first seemed unclear. The metaphor of change in landscape architecture as fun ink painting comes in 2 aspects. On one hand, the ink mark splashed on the paper is like the found landscape, an idea that I introduced in our Wednesday's lecture. It's a landscape that has always existed, but somehow eluded our recognition and appreciation. Similar to the popular use of polished copper mirror in the 18th centuries, which assisted viewers in appreciating a specific scene as if it were painted by famous painting Claude Lorraine. Next page. Our contemporary appreciation of the landscape is still preconditioned by our prior knowledge. What we can do as landscape architect is introduce a new way of looking at our surroundings and a new aesthetic readings of the world previously unforeseen. On the other hand, just like Fleming painters spontaneously respond to what already splashed on the paper and improvise with limited strokes to capture the essence of the subject, landscape architect can also exercise this way of seeing meaningful details and insert minimal interventions into the landscape to alter its reading. I shared in the intermediate architecture studio that my partner and I taught here at the BAC, which was the design of a nocturnal building situated in Central Park, New York City. The theme of the studio, night, which is just like the idea of the found landscape, students explore the filmic way of documenting and conceptualizing this found landscape through the lens of city, flora, fauna, sky, darkness, and time. A series of abstract rooms and minimal insertions into the landscape in response to the found are introduced to the landscape in response to the found landscape, which is night, embracing night, which alters the material and sensorial hierarchies, and also rearrange the order of reality that we experience at daytime. In another project taking place in a port city in northern France, Decay is a vast, tranquil space situated between the harbor and the city. A short film here captures the vastness of the site, compressing everything happening in the harbor and the city into a thin line in between the sea and the sky. The emptiness here leaves room for the full expression of constantly changing light and color. The design proposal was simple as various subtle slopes and planes being introduced to guide the movement through this landscape, providing a concentrated experience of the expression. Just like the splashed ink, monumentality exists in the landscape, awaiting for recognition and appreciation. The project's goal is to preserve this quality and necessity of the emptiness, exploring an alternative aesthetic of the public open space, adding a few strokes to complete the fluent ink painting. So the third and last metaphor is change in landscape architecture as a window reflection. During the BAC lecture, I shared a few images from our photography exhibition named Windowscape Wonder, and imagine urban nature through reflection. This exercise works against our urge to respond immediately to the problem of a site and rush to a design solution. Instead, it helps us discover a landscape. Here, I want to elaborate on a few layers of meanings of window reflection as a metaphor that initiate change and inspire our practice. Next, please. Firstly is obviously the collage quality of those window reflections. While such images could easily be generated using digital tools, especially in this era of artificial intelligence, what makes them meaningful for us is the here and now, the contextualized and spatially based understanding of a landscape. As artist Max Ernst described collages as a systematic exploitation of the coincidental or artificially induced encounter of two or more unrelated realities on an apparently inappropriate plane, and a task and a spark of poetry that leaps across the gaps between them. We, in this kind of physical collages, seek unexpected encounters, ironic juxtapositions, and unusual use of spaces. Secondly, the window reflection's ability to merge interior and exterior space into one space, the observer and the observed into one plane, remind us of landscape's potential of reconciling opposite forces, natural and artificial, growth and decay, beauty and sublime, being and becoming. This had led us to use film, which offers opportunity to document a landscape in constant transformation, enabling the viewer to access and possess the space and transcend the polarity between nature and artificial. Thirdly, a window reflections constant registration of motion. The passing of interior and exterior elements and the enticement of motion as it creates different collages of spatial, as it creates different collages depending on the viewer's angle and distance from the window, which call into question how we actually perceive and pay attention to landscape. A landscape is constantly changing at various temporal scales. Motion is a spatially generative activity through which we comprehend the multifaceted landscape and perhaps elicit new meanings. In closing, by embracing change, spontaneity, and the interplay of forces within the landscape, we can create design that respond to and shape environment around us. Guided by these metaphors as inspiration, we shall continue to explore, innovate, and reimagine the possibilities of landscape architecture. Thank you. Please start turning the time.
Well, I don't see the slide on the computer. Is it normal? Okay, I'm ready. Okay. All right, so it's a lot of pressure for me because we should be done already. And so I'm going to talk about a little bit about philosophy, applied philosophy. And so this is already kind of difficult. And it's already kind of a big challenge. And doing it in, what does it mean? 15 minutes? Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So we got some extra minutes. Okay, great. Thank you. My colleagues talked about different processes that are made to challenge ourselves and to challenge also the students in the class. You know, so the way I challenge the students is by trying to talk about applied philosophy in our field, in the field of landscape architecture. And so today I will be talking about applied philosophy, the applied philosophy approach, and how it can create the conditions of change, BAC and nunc. But first, let's start with a few examples. So that's the next slide, thank you. And a few examples so that people are not like lost in the theoretical ideas that I will be developing a little after. So this is the work of the office of Kirsten Geers and David van Sepperen, two Belgian architects. What's interesting here is that those two architects, maybe without necessarily acknowledging it, they are using philosophy in their work. And if I say so, it's because they've been talking about an architecture without content. And so in their work, the absence of content, the fact that there is not necessarily any functions that are that are clearly identified to perform, for the building to perform. It's kind of it makes the space undetermined, and it's for the users to fill the space with their practices. So that's what I call an example of indetermination. Another example is the work of architect Go Hasegawa, Japanese architect, who has developed residential dwellings that are once again very different from the regular dwellings that are usually made to control and manage a few things within the realm of dwellings. In this case, the houses that he designed are more like learning devices. They are made to create connection, to inform relations between human beings, and also between human beings and their environment. So in that sense, they are made like learning devices, made to learn about relations and made to learn about relations to feel the existence. Another example, next slide, finally, is what I call the reorganization of common values. And in that case, it's at the CCA in Canada. Lectures in the summer are organized outside on the common lawn to share ideas, to share a moment together, and to interact with each other. It's rather than doing designed cure, in that case, they are taking care of socialities. And then an example from the landscape architecture field that actually gather all these aspects together, the indetermination, pedagogical space, and also the reorganization of common value. And this is the project done by landscape architect Christoph Meyer and Markus Bader in Berlin. That's the former Tempelhof airport, a place that hasn't been programmed, a place that hasn't been filled with functions, but remained open for the public to be engaged with it individually and also as groups, as a community, and to develop practices in the space that are defined by the users. And final, this is the same place. The same place again. In that case, it's the layers of pollution of the former airport that haven't been removed. They've been left here as kind of a trace of the past, the different usage that occurred on the site. Another example of indetermination and considering that we all citizens in the 21st century are all designers. So in that case, the example of a desired path. Another one, imagine some sort of a Canva that could have been implemented by the designer, but a very limited implementation, and then leaving to the citizens the option to design their own path on regular daily practices. And an historic example of the Maidan in India, a vast space open to the public, where inhabitants organize the activities on their own. All right, so this was made to illustrate this idea of the applied philosophy, and to kind of locate where applied philosophy comes into this field. The field has been organized according to an applied science approach in the 19th century, meaning that landscape architecture has usually been working in a scientific way, looking for problems, or maybe identifying problems, I should say, and then looking for solutions. That's the old principle. So with the applied philosophy approach in the 21st century, it's instead of finding downstream solutions, we are looking at upstream strategies. Historic of the social interventions showing how we moved from the applied science approach to the applied philosophy approach is illustrated by this table. So it's a chronological order. On one side, the first column is the different parks that can be identified since the 19th century until now, the various concerns, and then the different actions. As you can see, in the first block, it's basically about identifying problems. So it's a lot about, it's data-driven. There is no human ontology at that moment. And then it's about finding solutions. The second block, the one in the middle, is kind of an intermediary approach. One of the famous approach is the participatory approach. In that sense, for this intermediary approaches, there is it's more about listening. It's about being together, doing things together. So it's a process. Whereas applied philosophy, the last block, is ontologically driven, and it keeps asking who we are, how we dwell, how we coexist together, and what is ethical, that sort of question. So it's more about strategy in the way we approach landscape architecture in that sense. It's particularly about new relations. What new relations do we develop? How do we develop these relations, and what should these relations be? And one of the concerns is to empower citizens and to act justly. That's the main concerns here. So the 5 phases of the applied philosophy approach are very logical. It's to apply philosophical ideas, you first need to acquire the philosophical concepts. That's the first phase. Then to be able to apply those concepts in the landscape architectural field, you need to enunciate derivatives, meaning dialectics. That means the formulation of concepts that can be applied to landscape architecture. And then there is the need to activate those concepts in the urban landscape. That's kind of the implementation somehow. And this implementation then has some consequences. It modifies the sensorium. It alterates the symbiotic milieu in which we dwell. And therefore, as a consequence, there are new communalities and new socialities that are unfolding. 5 phases. If we, for instance, if we consider the idea of selfhood and otherness, in other words, how to coexist together, how to develop an existence in this century, we could look at, for instance, the work of those 3 phenomenologists, Maldinet, Ricoeur, and Rancière. Maldinet is focused on the immediacy of the moment that is all around us, all around the individual that is experiencing the world, being in the world. Ricoeur is more focused on the social aspect, how we develop relations with the institutions, and then Rancière is more focused on the political aspect, how we are engaged in the city. So Maldinet talks about openness. Openness is some sort of is an attitude. It's about being in the ahead of yourself somehow. So in other words, looking for experiences, the moments when experiences and events occurred in front of you, ahead of you. Ricoeur talks about recognition. self-dignity, but also mutual recognition between people. And then Rancière talks about emancipation of the spectator, which is about how to find, how to engage, how for people to be engaged. Okay, and so those three philosophical concepts translates into concepts we can apply in landscape architecture, which are indetermination, pedagogical space, and organization of common values. I gave you examples at the beginning of this presentation. So in this research, I come up with some recommendations for landscape architectural practices. There are three of them. Undoing programming. So that's about kind of removing the designer, preventing the designer from being too interventionist with the site, and instead giving a voice to everyone. So it's about making a space that has polysemic capabilities, polysemic qualities, and in other words, to give back and to give back territories of empowerment to the people, and develop an horizontal civil society where everyone is actually engaged and involved with the making of the city, the making of the society. Another recommendation is undoing vertical knowledge. So it doesn't mean deconstructing vertical knowledge, but emphasizing horizontal knowledge. In order to make the spaces that we created places of reconciliation and more anchored into the realities that we encounter. And then the last recommendation is about undoing technicity. Undoing technicity doesn't have to, is not against technology. It's against it's more against the technological mindset. When we envision everything as a series of steps or a series of interventions or a series of causes and consequences. And so this is it. So it's about disrupting this technological mindset and giving back the possibility for genuine transaction with the world. And that comes from Heidegger. So I'm going to conclude with a few more slides, just to say that there is what is at stake is a form of new humanism. So finding the way to develop a new culture. And for us in the field, it's about how to activate it. That's one of the questions on which we reflect. It's about maybe finding the way to develop design score that can inform spontaneous changes, and it's also about the engagement of all individuals. It should be. This is the nature of this new humanism is to engage everyone in it. And so that's in the case of the applied philosophy, that means doing this activation by having philosophers encountering other professionals, such as the landscape architects, to form new alliances and challenge the old structures. The conclusion for this, landscape architects need to be engaged with pertinent philosophical questions. We shouldn't be afraid of doing these kind of things. The field is transdisciplinary more and more, and philosophy, I believe, should be part of the questions and the reflections that we have in the field, in order to create the conditions of change, and acting with upstream strategies is a way to unfold change in these conditions, the conditions which are undoing programming, and doing vertical knowledge and doing technicity. Generally speaking, landscape architects must acquire a reflex of responsibility, engagement, and awareness of our intersubjectivity. We are all connected to each other, and of the anthropoetics of space. The applied philosophy approach is an opportunity to transition landscape architecture to a new design paradigm. And I will end this presentation with those words from Michel Serres, just to maybe convince you one more time that this change is necessary. In comparing with the 17th century, body, life, death, and humanity have all changed. It's not the same world, not the same life, and not the same body, but we still have the same institutions, the same politics, the same governments, and the same rights. That's an untenable situation. Therefore, the goal today is trying to prepare this new culture, these new humanities. And that's what we're trying to do in the School of Landscape Architecture. Thank you.